The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Oshkosh Diaries. I'm Paul Esslinger, joined again by Derek Kloiber, co-host. Today, guest, I'm very honored to say that he is a friend of mine. I met this gentleman several years ago. For those of you who've been in Oshkosh for a while, you may remember him as host or co-host of Commentary, which was a local access show. He was a co-host of several other local access shows. He's been an activist for several local, state, and national issues. He has his own website. We'll get to that a little bit later, and his own blog. He writes for a local publication, The Scene, on a monthly basis. He was a candidate for the 54th Assembly District back in the 1990s. He was a former council member in the City of Oshkosh, former deputy mayor in the City of Oshkosh, and he is currently a professor of communications at UW-Oshkosh and former chair of his department. And I have to say, in all the people that I've met, both in business, politically, and as friends, one of the biggest words in my vocabulary is respect, and I have as much respect for this gentleman as I've ever had for anyone in my life. So with that, we'd like you to help us have Dr. Tony Palmeri join us and talk to us for a little while.
Well, thanks, Paul. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And I'm really honored to be here with both of you guys.
So we talked about the website here. It's tonypalmeri.com.
Yeah, but I really don't update my website that much anymore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, that was quite a bit of time on that. Up to the time I was on the council. Once I got on the city council in 2007, I got so busy with local issues that the time to update websites was gone. So now I mostly just keep my blog updated, mostly with the column that I write for The Scene newspaper. So I may start my website again.
How do we get to the blog?
Just Google Talk to Tony.
Talk to Tony.
Talk to Tony, and that'll get to the blog.
Okay.
These days, mostly what you'll find on my blog is my monthly column for The Scene, which is about a 1,000-word column I write every month, mostly on media-related topics, and on the blog I put hyperlinks to other sources that people can go to. Okay. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter. People can look me up on Facebook and Twitter. Just put in Tony Palmeri, and I'll be there. I'd be happy to friend people if they'd like to be friended. So, and I'd like to actually get back and do some television at some point again. It's just the question of the right time to do it. Because as you guys know, it's so time-consuming to do this stuff. Yeah,
and you have the volunteers with you to do it.
Exactly.
Well, Tony, what we do on the show is we start out the show from ground zero, day number one, so to speak, when Tony was a kid. Where'd you grow up? And let's talk about when you were a kid, Tony.
Well, I was born in 1961 in Brooklyn, New York City. And blue-collar parents. My father was a shoemaker. My mom took care of my two brothers and I, and then after we got old enough, she went back to work and worked for McDonald's. Actually spent more than 20 years there. My parents are probably the hardest working people that I've ever met in my life, and I think that's where I got my work ethic from. In fact, at the university, professors usually after they're there at least 7 or 10 years take what's called a sabbatical. Which essentially a semester or a year off to do some research. And I've never taken a sabbatical yet, even though I've been at UW-Oshkosh now for 25 years, because I can't imagine not working. And I think I got that from my from my parents. Even though technically on sabbatical you are working, but work to me is being in the classroom, working with the students, and so on. So very hardworking people, didn't have a lot of money. In fact, most of my early years, I slept on a fold-out couch in our living room, first with my older brother, And then with my younger brother, it wasn't until I moved to the Midwest to go to graduate school that I actually had my own room.
Okay.
So we had a very small apartment. It was a house which my grandparents were on one side. We were on the other side, and there were renters on the ground floor. So it was very cozy, and it was an Italian-American family, Northeast, very loud. I watched my dad get up every morning to go to work. He was up at 5 a.m. And they would have their breakfast in the dining room, which was right next to where I was sleeping. So whenever they got up, I was up, right? And that's why to this very day, I rarely sleep later than 6 or 7 a.m.
Right.
And I think that was conditioned from from very early on. So it was we didn't have a lot of money, a lot of material resources, but there was a lot of love in the household.
Right.
And my parents were very unhappy with the public school system in New York City. So at great personal expense to themselves, I still don't know where they came up with the resources to do it. They sent my brothers and I to private school. And I think that's probably the reason why I ended up going on for a doctorate degree, because the schools I went to, especially my high school, which was called Archbishop Malloy Catholic School, it was all boys. Right? I didn't like the fact that it was all boys. But I tell you, it was academically rigorous. And in fact, my high school was so academically rigorous that my first 2 years of college were a complete breeze.
Really?
I felt like I didn't have to study my first 2 years of college.
So very good conditioning in that school.
Very much so. They instilled discipline, and you develop this ethic that you're in school to work hard and learn something.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't always have fun at the time, but I look back on it and I think, wow, I'm kind of glad I went there.
Right.
I learned how to read and write, and actually they instilled a real love of reading and writing, which is what I try to do with my own students now.
Well, no, if you go back, Tony, and think of any movie that came out, of course, movies can be a little dramatic, but I mean, Brooklyn, New York, 1960s, Italian-American community. Did you have the stereotypical? I mean, were they have any mafia guys around, or did you get rolled at all, or did your brothers beat you up, or what was going on?
No, there no gang affiliations or anything like that. For a lot of Italian-Americans, that's really a sore spot, because every ethnicity on the planet has some kind of organized crime, but for some reason the Italians got pegged with it more than anyone else. I always felt that those movies, I find those movies enjoyable, but I always find that they get the female parts wrong.
How so?
They never seem to get. They always have the females as very submissive. Mm-hmm. And in my experience, the Italian females, I'm talking old school now in the Northeast, would be very domineering in the household. All right, you don't always get that in some of those films. They've got more of the patriarchal structure. But no, I don't think any of those old movies really capture my experience. But I tell you what did influence me a lot in the late '60s in New York, believe it or not, and this ties into my political interests. New York City in the mid-'60s elected as their mayor a liberal Republican. Now today that's an oxymoron, right?
Yeah.
And it was a guy named John Lindsay. And as a very little kid, I found John Lindsay to be the most charismatic, inspiring guy out there. I mean, when there were race riots going on throughout the country in the late '60s, and I'm old enough to remember this, New York City managed to avoid most of that. And a large part of it was you had this mayor, Lindsay, who was a very charismatic, good-looking man, very eloquent. He went into the communities where the violence could have broken out, and as mayor, not surrounded by police, was able to quell any violence. At the time, as a 9 and 10-year-old kid, I found that so inspirational.
Can a mayor do that? Can Rahm Emanuel do that in Chicago now?
No. I don't think there are any mayors around now that have that kind of appeal. Maybe it's not their own fault. I mean, our politics have become so much more bitter and divisive now. But that was very influential for me as a kid. And I ended up studying communication, what I call rhetoric. And I think a lot of it was watching that one individual who seemed to be able, through the power of words, to keep this major city from exploding as badly. I mean, there were disturbances in New York City, no doubt, but compared to what was going on in the Midwest, Detroit, Chicago, and other places, it wasn't even close to that.
Just want to step back a little bit and talk about your parents and the atmosphere in your house. You mentioned, blue collar, lots of long, hard work.
Oh, yeah.
So how was the atmosphere? Was it a pretty strict atmosphere in the household?
Oh, yeah.
Didn't get away with too much, huh?
Well, one thing that my parents insisted on, and I tell you, I would really advocate this for families even today, is that we eat meals together.
Oh my God,
okay.
yes. Yes, that's so true.
And now we had a smaller place, so maybe it was easier to do it.
Sure.
But today, you've got like several people out in the TV, other people are out doing something else. They wanted there to be some time when we were together as a family.
Yeah.
And I think that was very important to do that. They were strict, but in a way that you kind of respected them. I mean, from an early age, I had the sense that my mom has a high school education. Right? She didn't go to college. My dad probably had the equivalent of a fourth grade. He's actually got an interesting story. My dad was born in New York City, so he's an American citizen, in 1929. Shortly after he was born, the Depression hit.
Yep.
Right? He, at the time, his parents, my grandparents, had 3 other children. So there were 4 kids, right? Depression hits. My grandfather, like everyone else, was out of work. He felt he couldn't support his family. So he sent his wife and kids back to Sicily.
Really?
Yes, yes. So my dad actually spent the first, I think he came back to the States when he was 18. Right? They couldn't actually come back until after World War II. Right? So he may have been 17 or 18, and he got back to the States, and then the whole family came back. So my grandparents were actually separated for anywhere from 15 to 20 years because of the conditions going on at that time. First, he couldn't support the family, and then the war years, you couldn't travel back and forth. So my dad then gets back, and because he was born in Brooklyn, even though he'd only lived 30 days there, he was an American citizen, and he almost immediately got drafted to go to Korea. And he served, I believe, 2 or 3 years in the Korean War. Right? What an incredible story. He didn't even speak that much English.
Wow.
Right.
And was out there, saw service, and don't try and put the military down though with that guy. I'll tell you, he is very patriotic, and the VA benefits. I know there's all this talk about the VA, but my dad would have died a long time ago without his VA benefits.
Yeah.
And he's always felt he was treated really well by the VA, but very strict. But you respected them.
Sure.
You knew they were working hard, very honorable people of integrity.
So, okay, you're living in a kind of a strict, but I don't know if it's a loose-knit family, but what did you do for fun? I mean, did mom and dad give you a long leash, a short leash, and, were you chasing girls around or what?
Well, not at the all-boys high school.
No.
No, not there, unfortunately. It was Brooklyn, New York. We had a schoolyard across the street. We played lots.
Played ball, huh?
We played stickball, wiffle ball. My favorite thing was this game. Maybe I don't know if they had it in Oshkosh. It was called Kick the Can.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
We played that for hours and hours at a time. Then when we got old enough, we'd go to movies. Which going to movies in New York City back then was just incredible because we were these like teenage kids trying to get into R-rated films. Lying about your age, finding a way to get in. Because I remember speaking about the Italian, I did see The Godfather when it came out. I think I was like 10 or 11 years old. How I got in, I have no idea. But somehow we found a way to get into these movies. We had fun. Schoolyard stuff, largely, but it was kind of a short leash. I mean, my parents had they never used the word curfew, but you knew you had to be home at a certain time. And, because our house or apartment was so small, it would be very difficult to like hide, I mean, for example, I never smoked. A lot of my friends smoked. But I knew that if I smoked, I was going to walk in the door, they'd immediately smell it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's no place to hide.
Yeah.
All right? So, yeah, short leash, but we had our fun.
And you mentioned you had an older brother
Older
and a younger
brother
brother?
and a younger brother. My older brother is 2 years older. He still lives in New York. He's in the Albany, New York region, works for the state of New York. My younger brother is 7 years younger than me, so he came along a little bit later. My older brother, he was teasing me nonstop as a kid. I mean, that's common among brothers. But he actually, and this is true to this very day, my older brother is so loud and rambunctious. He's very much like, remember the old John Belushi character, Saturday Night Live?
Oh, yeah.
That's my older brother. Life of the party, loud.
Bluto?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. He's calmed down a little bit as he's gotten older. And I think reacting to that, I became the real quiet, studious one. All right. My brother did get his college degree, but even though I was 2 years younger, I got mine first because I became the one who was so studious.
Sure.
And actually, when I got my degree, he was so shocked because we lived in this household where, to this very day, I don't know how I studied. Again, very little room. I didn't have my own room. So I would literally study at the dining room table while there were all these loud conversations going on. Right? And I think it taught me how to focus.
Sure. Clean everything out. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I'd also spent a lot of time at the campus library, so that helped out too. I was at St. John's University in New York City.
Now, one thing, Tony, through the years, I'm sorry to say that you're a Yankees fan,
yes.
And I'm an Orioles fan, and there's a little headbutting there. But so how did, just because you were from New York, Brooklyn, that you became a Yankees fan, and what about the Mets?
It's interesting. You talk about like playing out in the schoolyard and whatnot. The first friends I made, 99% of them were Mets fans. And I don't know what it was. I felt I had to be contrary. All right. I thought they're all being Mets fans, so I'm going to be a Yankee fan instead. I gave it something to argue about.
So this is a newsflash here. Tony Palmeri was being contrarian on something. All right.
Yeah, I was being contrarian like at the age of 11, and then it was very uncomfortable because in the early 1970s, the Yankees had terrible teams. Mm-hmm. And the Mets, they made the World Series. They won it in '69, and then they made it again in '73. So I was just getting razzed nonstop by all my Met fan friends. If the Dodgers had stayed in Brooklyn, I would have been a Brooklyn Dodger fan. In fact, I still kind of like the LA Dodgers to an extent because they moved out of Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I was being contrary to my friends. I became a Yankee fan.
So what about the Bills and the Giants? You getting into football much or not?
New York Giants, yeah.
Giants.
Those were always my favorite. I did kind of like the Jets in the early '70s because of Joe Namath, the quarterback. But the Giants had Fran Tarkenton at that time at quarterback, who was known for his scrambling.
Mm-hmm. Vikings, who was with the Vikings.
Yeah, and I liked him as much as Namath, and then I became more of a solid Giants fan.
Okay.
Knicks for basketball, Rangers for hockey.
Did you get, I don't know how much money you had or if mom and dad can give you any money, but did you get a chance to go to any games? Or?
Actually, that's a good point. In the summertime, my friends and I would go to, because generally when the Yankees were in town, the Mets were out of town, and vice versa. We would go every week, the Mets or the Yankees. And back then, at both of those stadiums, you could buy bleacher tickets for $1. So I had these.
$1?
Yeah, for $1 in the 70s.
Wow.
You could get into the stadium for $1. But I had these friends that were so smooth and slick. They would always find a way. I was always too intimidated to do this kind of stuff. I always thought we were going to get in trouble. They would find a way to get us into the box seats.
Wow.
Even though we paid $1 for these tickets. And I don't know how they did it to this very day. I wouldn't ask questions. I just go along with the crowd. Because, there's always empty seats around. And these guys had a radar for seats that were not open. Often they would say you'd find like boxes where it looked like there were a family that had a box, but for whatever reason, family members didn't come. Mm-hmm. They would literally ask, can we sit there? And 9 times out of 10, the people would say, sure, go right ahead. Right? Seats open, someone should sit in it.
Tony, we got like 1 minute left before we take a break. Did you have any, getting money, did you have any jobs when you were a kid? Mowing lawns and plowing or snow blowing or anything like that?
No, actually the first job I had that paid money was working at a fast food place. I think I was 16 when I got that. It's a place called Nathan's, very famous in New York City for their hot dogs.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
They started in Coney Island. That's not the one I worked at. I worked at one in Queens. And that was actually my first paying job. I wanted to deliver papers before that. I think my mom thought it was too dangerous. We were in this neighborhood that wasn't the best neighborhood at the time. and she was afraid I'd get beaten up or robbed or something like that. But there was a point where, and I think it was when I turned 16, my parents made it pretty clear, if you're going to still live here, you're going to have to contribute some money. I was one of those families, I'm sure there are a lot of people in Oshkosh like this, where, you know, middle, lower income people, where your parents tell you where the box is, where the money goes. And every week I was expected to put some money in that box.
Yeah. Reminds me of the beginning of Caddyshack. They had that
Right.
where they had the kids had to put their money in. But
Yeah, exactly.
okay,
That was
well,
us.
enough of that. So we'll come to our first break here. So we learned a little bit about Tony as a kid. In the next segment, we'll learn a little bit about how Tony came to Oshkosh, what he did, and then later on in the final segment, we'll learn a little bit about his time on the city council and his activities then, and what he's doing now, and what he wants to do in the future. So with that, stay with us, and we'll be right back.
On the surface, the simple pleasures in life are going on all around us. But inches beneath the surface, utility lines are carrying electricity, gas, and more to your home. Digger's Hotline helps avoid costly or dangerous mistakes. It doesn't matter how deep you're digging, call 811 or click diggershotline.com 3 working days before you start your project, and we'll help take the risk out of digging. Protect your simple pleasures. Know what's below.
There is a place where history is captured in time, where the voices of past generations still discuss the days of success, of love, hope, and joy. Timeless, playful,
Welcome to my attic.
memorable. The Oshkosh Public Museum. Come for the sights, stay for the memories.
Hello and welcome back to Oshkosh Diaries. Talking with Dr. Tony Palmeri, Professor of Communications here at UWO. Learned a little about Tony when he was a kid. Some good stories, and now we're going to talk to him about a little bit about when he's growing up and going in the future. So, Tony, when did you leave Brooklyn, and why did you leave Brooklyn, and how did you get to Oshkosh?
So I went to college at St. John's University, New York City, which is in the borough of Queens. Private Catholic school, always had a great basketball team. Back then they were called the Redmen. I think today they're called the Red Storm. Still pretty good. In my senior year of college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And one of my professors came up to me and said, I think you ask really good questions. And he said, teachers are, good teachers ask good questions. Mm-hmm. So he planted the idea. He had a connection in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, Central Michigan University, for a master's program. And he said, would you be interested in going to grad school? And I thought, it might be good for me to get away from New York City for a while. So in 83, 84, I went to grad school, Central Michigan University, and did very, very well there. And then a few of my teachers there had connections at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan, which was an incredible experience living in Detroit. I actually think it's one of the most misunderstood cities probably in the world. From what you'd get on TV, you would think it's this horrible, awful place with nothing to offer. I had 3 just wonderful years in Detroit, met so many fascinating people there, both at the university and in the city of Detroit. Actually, it's in Detroit where I really became interested in civic issues because there's so many problems in that city. There's like so much to get involved in.
Right.
So I got my doctorate degree there, and then it was time to look for a real teaching job. And my first job out of graduate school was at the Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York. And that was not a permanent position, but I spent 2 years there. Rochester, New York's a beautiful place.
And what year would this have been?
That would have been 87 through 89.
Okay.
All right. So then RIT, the Rochester School, they made it known to me that I was going to have 1 more year That was all that was going to be left. I was on these, like, I can't remember what they call the positions, but basically it was like 3 years and you're done. So I went to a national conference. I don't remember where it was, but at the conference, I ran into an old friend of mine from the Mount Pleasant, Michigan school, a guy named Bill Q, and he was teaching at UW Oshkosh. And he said to me, you know, we have a position open at Oshkosh, and he said, maybe you should apply for it. Now, like most people outside of Wisconsin, when you hear Oshkosh, you think of the baby clothes.
Right.
And I think I said to him something like, do people actually live there? Like, I was like,
Yeah.
Isn't that, maybe I had heard of EAA, I don't
Yeah.
remember, but I know I heard of mostly the clothing. And he said, no, come and interview, right? And I actually got an interview here. And when I got to Oshkosh, this would have been April of 1989 when I interviewed here. It was in academia, it's for full-time positions, like a 2-day interview. I just thought it was the most charming place. Now you have to understand, I was born in a neighborhood in New York City that was, you know, relatively poor, a lot of infrastructure disrepair, very concentrated with people. I come out to here for Oshkosh, and I found out that the south side of Oshkosh was called Brooklyn at one point.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a major selling point
Right.
for me. But I found it such a charming place. I remember they took me for dinner one night. Remember the old granary?
Yeah.
And at that time, I remember it was a Monday night because they had the Osh burgers.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They took me for an Osh burger, and I fell in love with the public library, which I still love in town. Menominee Park, on my interview, I thought was just an absolutely wonderful place. Met quite a few people on the campus and whatnot. And at the time, the dean of the College of Letters and Science was a really great guy named Jim Hoffman. And he just took an immediate liking to me. This would have been, again, 1989. I was very young. Most people, when they get their doctorate degrees, are at minimum in their 30s. I had done nothing but go to school, so I was 28 years old with my doctorate degree. And he said to me, Tony, we really need people like you here to be a new generation of leaders on our campus. I was just so honored to hear that. So, you know, they offered me the position, and I did take it. So I started in September of 1989. And didn't know if I was going to stay, because I thought maybe this would be a stopgap kind of thing. Because, you know, I'd become very political through my experience in Detroit and things like that. And I kept having people say to me, this was incredible. My first 2 or 3 years in Oshkosh, I would get into this political discussions with people in the community and on the campus, and invariably they would say to me things like, oh, you should probably be in Madison, or you should be in Milwaukee. You know, the implication being that things don't ever change in Oshkosh. And the more people would say that, the more I would think, no, maybe I do belong in Oshkosh, right? Because, you know, if you go to a place like Milwaukee or Madison, wonderful cities, by the way, and that's another reason why I came. I was a single guy at the time, and I thought, gee, you know, if I want to get to a bigger city, are they around? And I found out that Madison and Milwaukee only like an hour and a half away, so that was appealing to me. But, you know, when I heard things like that, you should be in Madison or Milwaukee, it solidified my feeling, no, I should be here. I'm in the right place. And that's when I started getting involved in the media, like you mentioned, commentary. Started doing that in the early 1990s through a challenge from a student, because I would talk about things in my classes. And a young guy named Chris Lee, he's now in media himself, wonderful guy. He was a junior at the time. He came up to me and he said, Dr. Palmeri, you always talk about this stuff in class. And he said, I'm in the RTF. He said, if I produce a TV show, will you host it?
Wow.
Right? This was a student at the time.
Yeah.
I didn't think he'd actually follow through, but he did. And at the time I thought, you know, I'm not going to have any credibility. I'm not from Oshkosh. I still had more of an East Coast kind of accent at the time. I don't know enough people, but I had met Jim Mather, the former mayor.
Sure.
And I met him on the day of the orientation for new faculty in September of '89. Jim Mather struck me as one of the funniest people. He'd spent the whole day cracking jokes. Very charming guy. I didn't know he didn't have any power, because when he was introduced as mayor of Oshkosh, I didn't know this form of government here. Right. I thought he was actually a real mayor. But I had known him from that event, and when I did the TV show, I thought, you know, maybe I can get Mr. Mather to co-host it. And you remember, you came on the show several times.
Sure.
So Mather and I did it for a few years, and you know, one thing led to another, and I would say by 1995, 6 years, it was pretty clear to me I was going to stay in Oshkosh. I was involved in so many activities, fell in love with the community. Yeah, lots of things that I would complain about and still do. But I just think it's really a really great place. And you know, the UW Oshkosh campus, when I first got here, I'll never forget, I pulled in a U-Haul truck. And so you know, you have to bring the truck back, and went to the U-Haul place at, what is it, on Witzel? Isn't it Witzel? And
well, it's in Ohio now.
Ohio, right. Yeah, Ohio. And I pull in, young guy in there, taking care of me. And he says, what brings you to Oshkosh? And I said, I'm going to start teaching at the university. And the first thing out of his mouth was, oh, UW 0. And I thought, oh,
Sweet.
no,
Yeah.
what does that mean?
Yeah.
And that's when I found out about the drinking riots and all that kind of stuff, right? Well, you know, maybe I'm deluding myself, but I think we are an extremely strong campus right now. And I pride myself on being one of those new wave of faculty in the late 80s and 90s that really established a new ethic on our campus. Don't get me wrong, like most campuses, the students, I think some of them party a little bit too much, things like that. But I think UW Oshkosh has really had a transformation in the last 20 years. I mean, the amount of faculty doing serious research has increased. The amount of people that take their teaching seriously. My department of communication, I'm just so thrilled to be in it because we just take our teaching so seriously. And that's really what I love about our campus. And that's the thing that kept me in Oshkosh too, the fact that our campus really does care about educating people. And and we work here with a lot of students that remind me of when I was young. You know, a lot of them are first-generation college students. Their parents didn't go to college. I can tell the same stories I told you guys, and they kind of like light up, you know, or I'm sure their parents told them very similar things. It's kind of like the Wonder Years, right? You guys have seen that?
Oh,
Sure.
That was one of my favorite
Great
shows.
show.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that show.
Yeah. I was more urban than those folks were in that show, but I can relate to those experiences a lot.
So you were Kevin then, right?
Yeah.
Was there a Winnie?
There was a Winnie.
There was a Winnie.
Yes, there was.
Well,
but I was too shy.
You were too shy?
Yeah, I was too shy. It was I went to this Catholic grade school. And in New York City at that time, there was really no middle school. You went K through 8, and it was all in the same building.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So middle school is what, 6, 7, 8?
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't hear middle school until I got to the Midwest. Because
Oh,
where
okay.
I was, K through 8 was all in the same building. And so I'm in this Catholic school, K through 8, and there was this one girl, her name was Rita, that I was just completely smitten with. But I could never say anything. I was way too shy. Then they go and put me in the all-boys high school. you know? I think I ran into her years later, and by that time it was just nothing.
Right.
But yeah, that would have been the Whitney.
Winnie.
Winnie.
Yeah.
You mentioned early on one of your inspirations, if you will, role models was Mayor Lindsay in New York.
Oh,
What
yeah.
other people along the way have helped shape your path that you've maybe aspired? Can you share some of that? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Teachers have been big. Even though I majored in communication and that's what I teach, I probably could have easily majored in history because I'm a huge history buff. I know you guys are too. But a lot of that was because I had 2 teachers in high school. One guy was they weren't priests, they were called brothers. This guy's name was Brother John Klein, who to this day I think is probably the greatest single teacher I ever had. This guy made history come alive in every single class period. It was one of those things where I could not wait to get to history class.
Wow.
And I was getting 100 on every single test because I was just so taken with it. At that same high school, we had a guy named Mr. Richard Salmon who had a very different style than the other teacher, but he would just tell stories for an hour and about history, historical events, and you were just taken with it. So those 2 guys became models for me at the high school level. At college, my main communication professor, the guy who asked me if I wanted to go to grad school, his name is Dr. John Gregg. probably the most influential teacher, especially in my communication training. And he actually, I think, he never really preached an ethical code, but everything about him suggested it, right? So that today I try and teach my students really three major things. One, that when it comes to speaking, you should always try and raise the bar, right? Try and speak at a level that lifts people rather than brings them down. Tries to bring some insight to conversations, right? Rather than get mired in, you know, nonsense and whatnot. Number two, I try to cultivate this ethic of public service. Get involved in something. You're so privileged and fortunate to be in this school, right? I consider myself so privileged to be at a university setting. When you sense that, you're obligated to give something back, right? And then the third thing is try to make a positive difference, right? Wherever you are, right? So raise the bar, have a public service component, and make a positive difference in the lives of people. I find I feel better about myself when I'm helping other people out. I know you guys are the same way also.
Absolutely.
So I'm teaching my students those things, and I'm thinking, where did I get that from? And a lot of it was my parents, but this one professor at St. John's University, John Gregg, that everything about him suggested those values. So those three teachers were my really big role models. I had my job through college. I quit the fast food place when I got into college, and I became a bank teller.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah, which was in New York City. It's incredible because their banks are so busy, and you meet so many interesting people. But, you know, I had a couple of managers there that were very influential for me. They kind of taught me a kind of workplace ethic that, you know, you show up on time and you respect other people. We had this one guy, young Italian guy. His name was Bruce Sapienza. How's that for an East Coast Italian guy,
that's a good Italian name.
He was his goal in life was to become a branch manager of the bank. But he was so on the level and articulate, and I saw him handle customer complaints, and I thought, wow, that's the way you're supposed to act in a workplace. Show up on time, respect your coworkers, right? Don't whine, don't mope, don't complain.
He didn't get very far, did he?
No.
I knew where you were going with this.
Yeah, no, he did. And I'll tell you, today, and I don't think it's just today, I think in every period you'll see people who don't have those kinds of ethical values. But I learned early on, you're not going to get any place by whining. You know, if you don't feel you make enough money, get the skills you need and apply for jobs that will pay more money.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Ultimately, I try to get this across to my students that you ultimately have a great deal of control of what happens to you, right? But you have to put the work in. I keep knocking on that with them. You've got to put the work in, right? And, you know, I'm perceived as a tough grader. I think I'm a fair grader. But I just think that too many people in the educational setting let people get by with mediocre work. And I do let my students know from day one that I have a very low tolerance for mediocrity, that you're here to excel, you have the ability to do it. And it doesn't do you a favor if I tell you you're doing A work and you're not doing A work.
Right.
Right? That will come back to haunt you.
Right.
Right? So, you know, I'm really, this past semester I had a student, he actually came back, this guy did 2 tours in Iraq, 44 years old, recently retired from the military, now he wants to find another job, he's coming back to school. He saw I was teaching a class in free speech and he took it. And that's one of the most difficult classes I teach because there's a lot of legalistic reading and the exams are hard and whatnot. And I was so honored. This guy came up to me after the semester ended and he said, Tony, I have to let you know, he said, I've been now back in college for about 3 semesters. And he said, this is one of the classes that really forced me to work. And he was very appreciative.
Yeah.
Right? He said, I studied harder for this class than any class I've taken. Stuff like that. I've had some great classes. But he said, I want to thank you for that. And when I hear things like that, I'm so appreciative.
That's a great segue. Hold that thought. It's time for another break. When we get back, I'm going to have one more question for you, Tony, regarding you being a professor.
Sure.
That I think is very important, and it's going to touch into what you just talked about here. And then we're going to get into city council stuff. So with that, I got one more question for Dr. Palmeri on his teaching. Then we're going to get into the city council portion of the show, the final portion of the show. We'll be right back.
On the surface, the simple pleasures in life are going on all around us. But inches beneath the surface, utility lines are carrying electricity, gas, and more to your home. Digger's Hotline helps avoid costly or dangerous mistakes. It doesn't matter how deep you're digging. Call 811 or click diggershotline.com 3 working days before you start your project, and we'll help take the risk out of digging. Protect your simple pleasures. Know what's below.
There is a place where history is captured in time, where the voices of past generations still discuss the days of success, of love, hope, and joy. Timeless, playful,
Welcome to my attic.
memorable. The Oshkosh Public Museum. Come for the sights, stay for the memories.
Hello and welcome back to Oshkosh Diaries. Again, we're sitting down with Dr. Tony Palmeri, Professor of Communications at UW Oshkosh. In the last segment, we kind of finished up. Dr. Palmeri was talking about his classroom and some of the things that were going on there. And in my opinion, I think teachers, professors are some of the most important people we have in society. They teach, the kids that are coming up, and they teach the people that are going to be running this country. So my mother was a teacher for 40 years. I heard many of the stories that went on, the rewards and the pitfalls, if there were some, of teachers. So Dr. Palmeri, you talked about a reward of someone that went through your class and came back. Is there another example? Is there a pitfall? Are there any pitfalls?
Before I get to that, you mentioned your mom, and I should tell your audience, I think one of the reasons why you and I have always gotten along so well is our parents were so similar.
Yeah.
Right? I knew Joe and Carol, and rest in peace, both of them, just wonderful people. I don't know if you remember how we met. It was 1996. I was running for office, and back then I wasn't very sophisticated. The Democrats and Republicans, now they get you the voters list, and you only go to homes of people that vote.
Right.
Back then, I just went to every door in town.
Right.
All right.
Right.
And I showed up at your parents' house.
Yes, that's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
And they immediately invited me in.
Yep.
And your mom was like one of the sweetest people at the time I'd met. And I sat there with them for probably an hour.
I think my mom would invite the Grim Reaper into the house.
Right.
But
right.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me that she was really a spectacular teacher, But, there are some pitfalls. I mean, one thing that bothers me today, and maybe I'm just betraying my age here, is we're moving toward online education, and I've got a lot of mixed feelings about that. I mean, I think a lot of great things can happen online. I try to work some online components into my classes that have discussions online and on something, but there's something about what can happen in that classroom when it's done well that I firmly believe an online
kind
class.
of an X factor in the classroom.
This is so rewarding for me. When you see a light go off with a student, you could just tell from their demeanor what happens throughout the course of the semester. There are ways to capture that online, but it's not as, I think it's easy to do that. I think the online education, unfortunately, has played into this ethic that you just need to get the degree, and this is maybe an easier way to do it, when it may turn out that maybe what people really need is this direct interaction with a real person, right? So I think the move toward online maybe is one of the pitfalls now. There's always battles over curriculum. I mean, in my department of communication in the 90s, we used to argue a lot more about what we're actually teaching, and I'm thrilled with my department now because now almost all of us agree on what we're doing and whatnot. But you know, I think in the UW over the since I've been there, the amount of bureaucratic red tape has increased dramatically. I mean, some of that is politicians in Madison just finding a target to pick on and whatnot. But, you know, overall, for anyone listening that may be thinking about getting into teaching, I would say the benefits of it so far outweigh the negatives that I would really urge it to anybody. And, you know, you guys remember Walter Mondale, right?
Yes.
Not the best presidential candidate ever, probably not the best vice president ever, right?
He got throttled.
Yeah, I think he won one state.
Minnesota.
But right, he won one state in '84, I think that was, right?
Yes, I think it was.
But I'll tell you, and I study political speeches. That's one of my expertise areas. There's one line from Walter Mondale. It was in that 1984 campaign. I think it was his acceptance address when he got the nomination. I'll never forget this line. He said, "I want to see an America where the best student in every classroom says, 'I want to be a teacher.'" Right? You know, and when I first heard that in '84, that inspired me. Because I thought, wow, what kind of a society would we be if the best student wanted to become a teacher? And I think that's why I know you and I disagree about, or probably all three of us disagree about Act 10 and all that kind of things, and about the teachers union. But, you know, I really do think that, especially at K through 12, you do have to have working conditions such that the best student will say, I can make a good living at that.
Right.
And I can do it. Because otherwise, the best student may get into, you know, the corporate world where they know they can make more money and so on. Don't get me wrong, nothing wrong with the corporate world, but you do need people in that classroom at all levels who are just so passionate and fired up about their topic areas. You know, when people ask me about the Common Core, I say, well, okay, you know, if you want to have a Common Core, that's great, but I think what we need more than that are passionate, fired up people who spend every waking moment thinking about how they're going to make that class better. Like,
Amen.
You know what I'm saying? Some of the teachers that I had, really inspiring people. So not many pitfalls in teaching.
Okay. Let's get into the political part here, Tony. And, you know, when I first met you, you know, I was on your show a few times.
Yeah, you were.
I was, with almost everyone, I was very skeptical. And, I mean, I knew your background from a state and national it was a, you know, a liberal background.
Yeah.
So I was, you know, while I had respect for you because you do your homework, and you know, if someone's going to argue with you, but they better pack a lunch and a dinner because they're going to be there a long time. So you know, I always had respect for you, and I always knew you had a liberal persuasion. Maybe you want to argue that here in a bit, but so now Paul Esslinger and Tony Palmeri, me being a conservative / libertarian, Tony a Green Party liberal / liberal, are on the city council together, and in most of these controversial issues, Tony and Paul are voting the same way. Now, some people said to me, is the world upside down now? How did Tony and Paul ever become politically aligned on the council? And am I correct in the liberal / Green Party political affiliation?
Yeah, but like you said, I mean, on partisan issues like state government issues, you and I would probably have more deep-seated disagreements. But I think on the council, and this is probably the family ethic again, when I went onto the city council with the ethic that I never want to forget that I'm not spending my money, right? I think elected officials get in trouble, I think, when they forget that simple lesson, right? Because believe me, if I was just spending my money in the city, there'd be a lot different things going on. But I have to remember that it's other people's, right? Now, that doesn't mean we should never do anything. We need to do a lot of things, but we have to put our priorities in order and make sure that our priorities are the priorities of the majority of people. I think I got that from my family, right? You know, just frugality, right? Understanding the value of a dollar. And I think you and I kind of connected on that kind of a level. And I also think that, you know, I know that you and I'm sure you too, Derek, are, you know, very suspicious of authority. Especially when we're talking about politics, unelected authority.
Yes.
All right. So I always found it appealing that you would be one of the only people on the council who would ask critical questions about the city manager, right? About the department heads. Now, I think we should always treat those folks respectfully.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Right? Like I said, I teach my students, raise the bar of discourse. But on the other hand, if I'm just going to be on any kind of board or commission or committee or council and rubber stamp what some non-elected official says, then why am I there?
Right.
Right? And I think we connect on that level. I mean, sometimes we disagree on where public policy should head, but on those two values, we know we're spending other people's money, and we know that we have an obligation to be critical toward authority. I think there's a lot of room for a connection there. All right? And, we probably don't disagree as much on state issues. I call myself a conservative liberal. I know that sounds like a contradiction in terms. But if you look at one thing that draws me to the Green Party, I'm not as much of an active member as I used to be, but I think the Green Party values are very conservative, right? Taking care of the environment, that's Teddy Roosevelt, right? Grassroots democracy, you were a populist, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
On the council. What we call economic justice, right, which I always interpret it as, if someone puts in a hard day of work, all right, we're entitled to a decent wage for that, and it should be fairly equal. And I am drawn to the nonviolence part. I mean, obviously we're in an incredibly violent world, and maybe this is my Catholic teaching growing up, all right, that we ought to do what we can to just try and create a more peaceful world, right? I'm not a pacifist. I don't believe that all wars are wrong. I don't believe that all violence is necessarily by definition wrong, but I think we should work really, really hard to create a peaceful world. I wish I had the answer as to how we do that.
I wish I had
So
that
again, my point is, I do believe that those are actually conservative values, right? Not some radical values and whatnot. So, Derek?
So what year did you first run and were elected to the council, and how long was your tenure on the city council?
I ran for the council in 2007, and I can't remember what issue it was that so ticked me off. It might have been the garbage fee. Remember that?
Was it Jackson Street?
No. I was upset with the Jackson Street, the widening, but that wasn't enough to get me to run. I think it was the garbage fee, and it wasn't even that I was upset about the possibility of paying a fee. 'Cause, you're going to get fees and whatnot.
Right.
You start to accept this. I just remember watching the city council meetings at that time and just feeling that the councilors were not challenging the city manager to come up with alternatives. And the feeling I got watching their discussions was, you know what, we can do this. There'll be a couple of hotheads pissed off, but we'll do it. All right. And ultimately, I think there was a referendum, right, to get rid of that, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was a local resident, Carl Sosnowski,
Right.
who went out and got petitions, and it got put on a referendum, and whichever side of the fence you're on, the citizens said, we don't want a garbage fee. I think it was 70 to 30, if I remember right. But now the council put that on there anyway. So
yeah, and there were a few other things. At the time, I remember Mayor John Dell'Antonia.
Yep.
He and I had a pretty decent one-on-one relationship, but on the council, I just thought he was so arrogant and whatnot. And I thought, you know what, maybe I should throw my hat in the ring. So I ran in 2007 and then got reelected in 2009. I think I was the top vote getter in 2009. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And then you appointed me as deputy mayor, right?
Well, the council did.
The council did. That's right. That's right. I think you nominated me for it, right? And then did that for a year. And then I ran for mayor in 2011. And, I got to admit, I didn't really want to run that year. I felt almost obligated to run. And then, I tell you, I was kicking myself after the election because when I saw how close it was, I remember saying to my now wife, at the time we were boyfriend and girlfriend, I remember saying to her, wow, if I put a little bit more effort into this, I think I could have won this race.
What was the margin?
It wasn't like 51-49 or something like that. It was close.
It was close.
But I remember looking at the map, I got blown out in West Haven.
Yeah.
Right? And I didn't do a lot of campaigning there.
Sure.
Now, and I'm thinking, and like you, I refuse to spend money on the campaign, so I put up some yard signs, right? But I looked at the results and I thought, I don't remember how many wards there are in Oshkosh, but I remember in that race, I actually won one more ward than Mayor Tower did. But I got blown out so bad in those two big ones out there in West Haven, that's where it swung. Did really well in the central city, and whatnot. So when you come that close and you really didn't even try that hard, then I thought, wow, that was so unlike Tony Palmeri, because usually when I get into anything, I go into it 1,000% and whatnot. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Burke put the work in, and he obviously deserved to win, and I thanked or congratulated him at the time, and I still do. But then, to tell you the truth, when I got out of it, I discovered that being on the council for those 4 years, it really was affecting my teaching. I mean, I still was an effective teacher. I'd never missed a class the whole time because of the council, right? But since I've left the council, I've now put so much more time back into my teaching,
right?
And I have found that refreshing. I'm not saying I'll never run again.
Yeah, I understand. Well, okay, we're dangerously close. We've got like 3-4 minutes. Look, Tony, we have these local elections in April. We have city council, we have school board, county board, and whatever, a few other things. We have a 10 to 20% voter turnout. And there are ramifications. We don't have time to get into all that, but there are ramifications of that. Is it time to get rid of these local elections in April and put them in November?
Well, I mean, do you believe that the vote turnout would increase?
Oh my God, yes.
It might. I mean, that's a sad commentary. I don't know. I mean, I think it's back at schools again. I mean, I think that K through 12 and the university, we need to do a better job of educating people at young ages about their civic responsibility. I try and get through to people. You have a responsibility to vote.
But you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it
them drink. So I mean, if changing the dates would increase the turnout, I think that would be a good idea.
Well, I mean, in November elections, you have, and I'm not trying to interject my opinion. I'm just trying to maybe you agree with this. But you have a governor's race, which now is very, very popular. You have two sides, the presidential elections and whatever else, where you have a 75% voter turnout. I mean, I just think is that not more representative of the electorate?
Yes, it is. It is, and even by global standards, 75% is not high.
Right.
But it was a lot high for what we are used to. So yeah, I mean, I think if changing the date to November would increase the turnout. But I've always believed, and I don't even know how we would do this, is that we have to get rid of the Tuesday voting. We're like one of the only countries in the world where our election day is on a major work day for most people. Now, that's not an excuse for people. You should find a way to vote. Right. But most of the European countries, you vote on a weekend, all right, where they'll have much, much higher turnout. We could, I think, fairly easily do that here. But I think the mainstream parties, the Democrats and Republicans, I think secretly they like low turnout. They have calculated that the low voter turnout benefits them
somehow.
Right. Especially now the way they've gerrymandered the districts, right? I mean, in the U.S. Congress now, there's Democratic districts, there's Republican districts. How many in Wisconsin, in our congressional districts? How many of the districts are competitive? Maybe the seventh. Well, we're in the sixth.
The sixth will be now with Petri leaving. I know there's a bunch of people that are running.
Right. Most of our congressional districts across the country are not at all competitive, and that's because they've so badly gerrymandered them.
Right.
So, I mean, I think changing the date would help, but I think we've got a lot of other things regarding elections we have to change also.
All right, hold that thought again. Derek, you have an announcement that you want to make for Facebook, right?
Yeah, I just want to keep reminding everybody to check out the two groups that we have on Facebook. One is for this show. It is Oshkosh Diaries on Facebook. On that group, you can find uploads of all the episodes, and we will typically put the episode that airs on Monday, the new episode, up Friday evening to give you a little bit sneak peek there. Also, check out the Oshkosh Memories Facebook group. We're well over 2,000 members at this point. Every day, people are adding more and more photos, thoughts, and memories. So check those two groups out and keep those posts coming, okay?
Thanks, Derek. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Just sitting here talking to Dr. Palmeri, I'm thinking about a million other questions that I'd like to ask. So, Derek, I hope I'm not going out on a limb here. Dr. Palmeri, would you be interested in coming back for another show and talking about the politics in Oshkosh and your views on that?
Anytime you guys would have me, I'd be honored to come back.
That would be wonderful.
Excellent. So,
absolutely.
there you have it. We'll have Dr. Palmeri again back. We didn't plan this, but like Inky Youngworth, there's just so much to talk about that we'll have Dr. Palmeri back. So thank you, Dr. Palmeri, for joining us, and hope you enjoyed the show. Tune in again next time for another episode of Oshkosh Diaries. Thanks.